Okay, I'm in my new place. I don't know if this is the setup I'm going to stay with for recording, but I had a better spot, but the light is hitting it in a weird way this time of day. So I am going to talk about space opera and Rocket Summer. My first week's reading for Rocket Summer, I read The Skylark of Space by E. E. Smith and his co author Lee Hawkins Garby on the first one. I actually read the first three Skylark of Space novels, um, which is kind of the first space opera. I read some other things for Rocket Summer as well, but I'll stick to just space opera in this one. I read three novels by E. E. Doc Smith and then something else. I see that mostly the co-author's name is left off the editions. She worked on the first book with him, which was published way back. No, I'm sorry, was written between 1915 and 1922, the original cycle of Skylark stories, and published, I believe, in 28 or 29 in Amazing Stories. They are it was a pretty good read, the first book. It starts out not as a space opera, but as a kind of a Tom Swift kind of thing, where it's these two rival groups. Well, Seaton is the hero, a guy named Seaton and his buddy who discover this various technologies that lead them to creating a star drive, an interstellar drive. They have a rival who would fit right in Silicon Valley today, a guy named, I'm not sure how to say it. I'm going to say Duquesne for now, who's a villain. They all end up going into space on their homemade rocket, their homemade starships, and it's set, as far as I could tell, it's set in contemporary times or near contemporary times to the time it was written. They're on Earth. There's no really government involvement. It's really kind of rugged individualism. It's similar to the way that a lot of it seems like a lot of self-published, indie-published science fiction space operas are kind of taking this tack again. Maybe in the influence of the Musk era or whatever, where it's not really like Star Trek, where the governments are involved or anything like that. It's just kind of rugged individualists doing their own thing, going off into space. There's a lot of books out now about somebody discovering a secret starship that their uncle designed and left to them, and my buddy found a starship, and these kind of books that are out now. So it's interesting to see how these themes come over back and forth over the years. So I read that. They don't really get into space and start doing stuff till the second half of the book, um, which would have been subsequent stories. I don't know how many stories make up this book. It's a fix-up novel, like many early science fiction novels were. So it's a bit episodic. There's it's really focused. The first book is really focused on the characters. There's the rival teams of scientists. There's Duquesne who really despicably tries to ruin their mission and steal their technology, but they end up working together for a while. I won't go into all the plot. They do end up visiting other planets, discovering strange races. The ship goes very fast. There's one point, when they first go out on their first mission, they're knocked unconscious. The good guys are knocked unconscious. For 48 hours, and they go so far, or 48 or 72 hours, and they go so far away from the Earth that they cannot find their way back. Of course, they figure out a way later, but it's the star systems are even all wrong. They don't have any reference points. That's how fast the ship goes. That's the Skylark. They end up building a second ship called Skylark 2, and then in the next book, and then well, I won't give away the ending. And then, but obviously they are lost in space for a while. They have some adventures. They meet some different races. The second book comes out in was it 29? I think it's called Skylark 3. This is the cover of Amazing Stories where it appeared, or at least part of it appeared originally. I read the Gutenberg versions of the first three books, and the third book is Skylark of VALERON. So after the first book, Doc Smith started writing these alone. Um, there's a big gap between when he wrote the first stories. I don't know if he intended to publish them, or he and his co-writer Lee intended to publish them. It took a long while, or they just did them for fun or whatever. Um, Skylark of VALERON is the third book. With the second and third book, and especially the third book, the scope expands by book. I think just as a reading experience, I enjoyed Skylark of Space the best. It's really focused on the five main characters, three men and two women that have to end up working together, even though Duquesne is a pretty despicable villain. But for a while, they have to work together to get back home and to contact these different races and stuff that they meet in space. But given the speed at the ship goes and the way that the heroes and the villain interact with other species that they meet, the scope gets very big. And by Skylark or Valeron, it's almost like some parts of it are almost like reading Olaf Stapleton or something, where there's just long digressions about different races. There's there's Valeron, which is a planet in another galaxy. Like I said, they go really big. I mean, in most science fiction, most space opera, and in, of course, like um, Star Wars and Star Trek, those kind of things are limited to one galaxy. But that's not enough for Doc Smith. They go to multiple different galaxies, and it reminded me the other day I was reading something. The latest estimate of galleries. You remember, probably, if you're old enough, you remember Carl Sagan uh, always would say billions and billions on Cosmos, and they used that as kind of a catchphrase when they imitated him stuff, billions and billions of stars. And well, actually, the most recent estimate, which I read in some article I came across, is that our universe, and of course there's speculation that there's even other universes, and we don't know how many there are, or if they're through black holes or whatever, but our universe, the current estimate of the number of stars is 2 trillion. I mean, 2 trillion galaxies. 2 trillion. That is two galaxies for every dollar of Elon Musk's net worth on paper. At least it was before the stock market dropped last week. That's a lot of freaking galaxies, But in this book, I don't know what the estimate of the number of galaxies in the known universe was, but they visit a lot of them. They go to a lot of galaxies. This Skylark of Valeron is the third book. There's four total. The first three were all written and published before 1935, I think. So they fit in the first week of Michael Givon's event, Rocket Summer. I'm reading these by the decade. So I have the fourth book. It doesn't come out till much later, so I'm going to read it in week 4. It's called Skylark Duquesne, if I'm getting that character's name right. And he's the evil villain, and he becomes worse throughout the books as the other characters become better. Some of the races they meet are kind of abstract. There's a great disembodied race. I think they're called the disembodied intellectuals, or just the intellectuals, the planet of the intellectuals, who just are just like pure mind. They cause some problems for folks. But a lot of the races, like the Valerons, even though they live in a different galaxy, than us, are nearly human. They're very isolated, and on VALERON, they build a third starship called the Skylark, and they name it after the planet, Skylark of VALERON. I think it's like, what was it, 5 miles? It's a massive, massive ship. So they have a lot of resources that they take their miraculous discoveries on Earth in the early 20th century that they create these ships with, and add to them technologies they discover from the other races that they meet, and they build quite a very uh, advanced civilization. Of course, being early science fiction, the humans are at the top of it. The second book, Skylark 3, has at least the version. I know I'm jumping around all over the place, but I'm trying to avoid spoilers, but still talk about some interesting stuff. Skylark 3, again, the second book in the Gutenberg version, which is I read, which is based on the magazine stories. There's an epilogue that jumps ahead thousands and thousands of years in the future, so you can see how this all played out. And humans come out very well in it. Duquesne conquers Earth at one point with all his technology he's discovered, whereas the other characters pretty much conquer the rest of the galaxy. So it starts out at a very narrow scope and goes to a broad scope. I would say not the best writing, but pretty serviceable writing. Pretty enjoyable stuff. It's fun to see where a lot of these tropes came from. A lot of these concepts first created. I would say, Asimov Foundation owes a lot to Smith. I think he would acknowledge that, as well as many other writers. You could tell he was a very, very influential writer. And so I enjoyed them. I read one other thing. I had to stop and pull up a photo of it. I read those E. Doc Smith books. I'd recommend them if you're interested in the history of science fiction and interested in the history of genre, space opera, traditional space opera, highly influential stuff. Just as a reading experience, I enjoyed them. I don't know if everyone will, because they are a bit flat in characterization, stuff like that, very much of their time. The other story I read, well, I read two other books, but I'll talk about them in a different video. This is a different kind of science fiction. But on the space opera, along the space opera lines, I read Black Destroyer by A.E. Van Vogt. This is the original astounding cover. I kind of thought I'd read this before, but if I did, I didn't remember it very well. This also will go on to form the first 6 chapters of the book Voyage of the Space Beagle. And this one was written in the 30s, so I read this. The other stories were written at different times, some in the 30s, some in the 50s. I think I'll just keep reading it next week, because they were kind of cobbled together later, like all these when the book editions came out, like, a decade after the magazine editions, because there wasn't really, at this time in the 30s, there wasn't really a small press or for these old magazine stories. They were kind of just published and forgotten, or maybe they'd be reprinted. But this story, and some people might know it as sort of the quasi, well, there's a relation to the movie Alien in that Van Vogt sued the producers of Alien and did get a settlement for quite a bunch of money and did get credit. But I have to be honest, I don't really see much similarity, other than that Black Destroyer is a very powerful creature. You can see it's a cat-like creature, and sometimes they call it a cat, and it has tentacles. And it's nearly undefeatable by this group of space explorers on the Space Beagle, who find it on this very isolated planet. Um, extremely isolated planet, a planet that really has no hope of ever discovering space travel, um, because it's so far from other star systems, and there's really no stars in the sky. It's got a dead city on it, a dead city or two dead cities, something like that. And this creature, and the scientists are trying to figure out this creature before it kills all of them, and it kills a lot of them. It's a great story. It's right up there with Who Goes There, John W. Campbell's Who Goes There. I think those are two that stand out as great science fiction horror stories. It's very well written. After reading Doc Edison, I mean Doc Smith, Doc Smith, and then to read A. Van Vogt is quite a jump up. He's a very good. He's a very effective writer. He's was out of fashion for a while, I think, until they both were, and so is the other writer I read this week. We're out of fashion a lot in the '60s and '70s. I think V. Van Gogh is really respected again now. He kind of got his reputation kind of got trashed by a critical essay that Damon Knight wrote about him at one point. Even though I think Damon Knight is an admirer of A. Van Vogt, he just used him as an example of kind of a less realistic type of, a less character-based kind of science fiction that people in the '60s and '70s were rebelling against, and that's kind of on theme for the spirit of Rocket Summer, which is to read classic science fiction. The first week of Michael K. Vaughan's event is to read stuff written before 1939. That's what I've done. Next week, the second week is the 1940s, the third week is the 1950s, and the fourth week is the 1960s. And Michael, in his most recent video for this year, his introductory video on Rocket Summer for this year, he said it's really, the kind of thing he's thinking of when he's thinking of the '60s is really mostly before 1965, which coincidentally or not is when the fourth and final Skylark novel was written. Skylark Duquesne. I'm really looking forward to that. To see the name of the villain associated with the name of the ships. All the other Skylark novels are named after the names of specific ships. The original Skylark, Skylark 3, is the third ship, which is really their most effective ship through the second and third books, and then finally Skylark VALERON, which they build on the planet VALERON, and that's the massive one, hundreds of kilometers long, I think, and so really almost like a city ship or a generational ship or something. Although they don't need generational ships because they can fly literally to dozens of galaxies in instance. So it's and then so the fourth one, I assume there's going to be a ship called Skylark Duquesne, named after the villain. He's a very bad man. It gets worse as the things go on. Although the alleged good guys do some stuff that is probably by modern standards questionable, but they are trying to preserve the the civilization, the unified civilization of the universe that they're trying to work towards. So there's some groups that don't fit in because I don't want to go too much into that, but it is a controversy that happens. And what else I was going to say? One other thing about that Skylark. It's very interesting in the first book, and this happens I don't know why this happens. Why does this happen? It still happens today. It happens in Star Wars. It happens in many classic science fiction books where they go and meet these alien civilizations, the explorers, and so often, and it happens in Dune, and so often the government is feudal. There's emperors, there's knights, there's why is that? I don't know. It seems to be a natural instinct of a lot of science fiction writers to create these kind of. I think someone's coming here. It seems it's almost like science fiction writers think that feudalism is the natural state of things, the natural order, or maybe they're trying to just come up with scenarios and empires and things like that that'll make fun adventure kind of stories. It's very common though, not in Star Trek where they meet all kinds of different civilizations, all kind of different democracies and dictatorships, different styles and stuff. But it seems like in classic sci-fi, there's a lot of swords, there's and lightsabers, what have you, and there's a lot of kings and queens and hierarchies and very little democracy. And so I don't know. Probably someone's thought of that. Probably people have written dissertations on it. But of everything I read this week, this was really fantastic. Really good writing. Really interesting, creepy alien. Uh, Superficially like the alien in the film franchise, but as you can see, it looks very different. The alien's male. A lot of the sections of the story are written from the alien's point of view, and they're very effectively done, in my opinion. And the characters seem like rational scientists, so I'm looking forward to reading the rest of the Space Beagle stories in subsequent. I think I'll just read it this week. I think the next section was from a story published in 1950, and then they're not in the fix-up novel of all these different stories about the Space Beagle. They're not published in the order they're written. They're arranged in a different order. So I'll continue with that, and got another little thing to talk about in my next video for two other books I read that I think this one's gone on long enough, longer than I meant to. So that's it. Rocket Summer Week 1 recap. Talk to you later.